Welcome everybody to this case study event. My name's Kieran Doe. I'm a senior tutor at ACA Masters. When I sat the case study exam myself, I won the ICAEW prize for the highest score in the world. Several of my students have also won ICAEW prizes for their performance in the case study exam. So in this session, I'm going to offer my advice on what you should do to prepare for your case study exam. So what you should do in the weeks leading up to the exam. And then I'll give some specific advice on each requirement. So what you should do when attempting that specific requirement on exam day, and also in your preparation leading up to the exam. And then at the end, we'll stop and have plenty of time for questions. So in terms of your preparation for case study, what's really important is that you understand what each of the three requirements involve. So of course, as I'm sure you are aware by now, there are three requirements in the case study exam. So the first one is a review of the management accounts for the most recent year in comparison with the previous year. Now, this has always been the requirement one. It's a financial performance analysis. So looking at the most recent set of management accounts and comparing them with the previous year. So you've done this type of financial statement analysis in other exams. At BST, there was a review of the performance question, usually in question one, and also in CR and SBM as well. So you should be quite well prepared for this question, as you've done this type of question several times before. So I've said it usually requires you to look at performance rather than position. So looking at the P&L rather than the SFP, the balance sheet. And that has almost always been the case in case study exams. So it usually requires you to look at revenue and some level of profit. So it depends on the business. It might be gross profit. It might be operating profit. And it might call out some specific cost lines. So here, for example, it mentions cost of sales. Of course, if you're going to analyze gross profit, you're going to look at cost of sales as part of that analysis. But it does ask you for revenue, cost of sales, and gross profit. And we'll talk about this, but it's really important that you focus very carefully on the requirement wording. So therefore, requirement one, certainly this part of requirement one, you should be very well prepared for anyway, having done this type of analysis in the other exams. But of course, you'll practice your technique, specifically for case study. Now, perhaps because requirement one is a little bit predictable, because it's looking at current year management accounts compared to the previous year, and you've done this type of requirement before, and of course, it's fairly predictable from the AI and past exams, then there's always an additional bit in requirement one. So there's usually an additional piece of analysis or like a one-off piece of analysis, and that will vary between case study exams. And whilst the type of issue is quite often flagged in the AI, it isn't kind of as predictable perhaps as the other parts of the requirement. So think of this as kind of your unusual bit, if you like, in requirement one. So that's what requirement one involves, high level. And we're going to talk about it, in a bit more detail when we get on to looking specifically, at requirement one. But, high level, what you'll have is the latest set of management accounts, and you'll be given some narrative as well, which will essentially give you the reasons why certain items have gone up or down, why revenue has gone up, why profit margins, have fallen. And you may be given this in narrative form, or it may be like numerical form. It could be financial information or non-financial information. So again, that's quite similar to SBM, CR, and also BST. So hopefully you can kind of appreciate that similarity there, and you'll have some narrative about the particular issue that you have here. So that requirement is fairly similar to what we've seen in the earlier exams. So then at requirement 2, so requirement 1, of course, is historic looking. It's analysing the historic performance of the business. Requirements 2 and 3 tend to be forward looking. So it tends to be looking at a proposal to do a certain course of action. So in this case, launch a new product. So then it's kind of like a financial appraisal. It isn't as technical as doing like an investment appraisal. It isn't usually discounting the cash flows. It will usually be some kind of like high level profit calculation, typically. It may require some consideration of cash, but it certainly isn't going to be as technical as doing like a full MPV style investment appraisal calculation. Probably more likely calculate the profit, consider the impact on cash, that sort of thing. Now, sometimes there is a more almost technical but more specific calculation. So in this case study, it was a calculation of ROI, but the way that the company calculated ROI was given in the advance information. So therefore, it's quite often the case that the type of calculation you're doing requirement 2 is flagged in the AI in some way. So therefore, you'll do a calculation for the proposal. So it might be a calculation of profit, it might be ROI, it might be some other metric that the business uses. And then what you'll be required to do is assess that. So you'll look at how significant it is. Firstly, does it meet the threshold? If there is kind of a threshold that needs to be reached, you can look how significant it is in the context of the rest of the business. How much revenue does it add? How does a profit margin compare, etc. Now, there'll be a lot of assumptions which go into the calculation. So when you do your calculation, you'll be given a lot of assumptions. So you'll be told to assume that costs will be this, assume that revenue will be this, assume that RRP will be this. So there's a lot of assumptions which go into the calculation. And what you then need to do is question, critique those assumptions. And that is a key part of requirement 2. So it's really important you do that. And we'll talk about that in more detail. It's quite often that there'll be ethics in requirement 2, although it can come up in any requirement, but tends to be more commonly in requirements 2 and 3. It's always in requirement 3, always has been in requirement 3, but it can also pop up in 1 and 2 as well, more commonly in requirement 2 than requirement 1. And you quite often have to consider like strategic and operational issues. That's quite a common requirement in requirement 2, or consider some sort of other factors, maybe impact on staff, impact on other business streams, that sort of thing. And then you advise whether to proceed. So actually, I said requirement 1s can be a bit similar to some of the questions you've seen in other exams. I think less so with requirement 2, but I do think that there are some other questions, particularly like BST and SBM, which are kind of quite similar to this. It can be looking at a proposal, like doing a financial appraisal, not always of the more technical investment appraisal type questions using MPV analysis, but perhaps looking at should the company undertake a certain project or not. So again, not too dissimilar to anything you've seen previously. So as I said, in terms of the information you get with requirement 2, you'll be given the assumptions to use in the calculation, and then you'll usually be given some other pieces of information. Like I said, you quite often have to consider strategic and operational issues, maybe issues on staff, this case, issues involving suppliers. And then you'll be given a few media articles as well, which will tend to raise a few issues for consideration as to whether to go ahead or not, or things which should be considered. And maybe the ethics issues are in there as well. So that's requirement 2. So requirement 3 quite often is also a proposal. So again, the business is considering undertaking certain activity, launching a new product, introducing a new policy, whatever it may be. It will vary between case studies. But again, looking at a proposal, and in this one, you're asked to look at risks and benefits, benefits and risk, which is quite common. Sometimes it asks for financial, strategic, and operational issues. So And then again, we've got ethics in here as well. So on the face of it, it is quite similar to requirement 2, and certainly of all the requirements, 2 and 3 are the most similar. But it tends to be that the calculations in requirement 3 are less detailed, quite often perhaps not as heavily flagged in the AI, but in this one it certainly was, both in our mock exam and in the actual exam. But again, you can see you'll be given certain numbers to work with, like we have here, so you can do the calculation, you can question a few of the assumptions as well. So it can feel quite similar to requirement 2. And then, usually you'll be told about the project, but then through here, you'll be told some issues that you need to kind of consider. So you'll be told pieces of information and you need to kind of turn that into how that could be a benefit or a risk. And then again, you usually get a few media articles as well, which quite often relate to the ethics issues. I mean, there could be ethics issues throughout, but quite often there's some ethics issues in here as well. So, as I said, requirement 2 and 3, of all the requirements, yes, they are the most similar. But requirement 3 isn't always looking at a new proposal. There have been cases where requirement 3 is looking at like a current issue that the business is facing. It might have been something that already happened. Sometimes it could be a negative issue, a contamination of product or something like that. And you need to advise kind of how they're going to deal with the issues or the potential issues which could arise from that. So that's kind of, a high level overview of the 3 requirements. I'm sure you're, quite comfortable, already with kind of what they involve, but it's really kind of important to kind of just appreciate at a high level what each requirement involves. So then you should understand what information is provided in the AI and what information is provided in the exam. So, with requirement 1, for example, when we have the advanced information, there will be the management accounts for the most recent year. So from the year prior to the one that we are looking at. And you usually have a few years worth of management accounts in the advanced information. And this kind of really allows you to kind of understand like the different revenue streams and importantly, the reasons why certain items have gone up or down in previous years. So you have the management accounts and you'll be given some narrative kind of explaining why certain things have gone up or down, the different parts of each revenue stream and what affects it. And because you'll have a few years worth of data, you'll be able to identify some trends. So maybe there's a particular revenue stream which is on an upward trend or possibly on a downward trend. So this is going to kind of help with your revenue analysis. Of course, in the actual exam, you'll have the most recent set of accounts, but understanding what's happened in the past will enable you to identify important trends. Similarly with gross profit analysis as well, you'll be able to pick up some trends there, looking at the overall movements in profit margins historically, what causes them to go up or down. So you'd have done all of that analysis based on the AI, and then in the actual exam, you'll be given the latest set of management accounts. And of course, you'll then be given the narrative and what effectively gives you the reasons as to why things have gone up or down in the most recent year. And I'll talk about this in a bit more detail, but it's really important that you use the exam paper information as much as you can. And then of course, you'll have the piece of information about the one-off analysis. So that's what you're provided with in the AI for requirement 1. The most useful pieces of information are the management accounts. However, it's not always the case that the reasons why certain things have gone up or down are with the management accounts. They can sometimes be dotted around other exhibits. So it's really useful to kind of collate everything together. You might have certain targets, which are mentioned in a later exhibit. If they're a target related to revenue or profit, you should kind of bring them in here. So you want the analysis of the management accounts, but also anything related to those numbers, whether there's reasons why they've gone up or down, or areas of significance, or particular interesting trends. You want to kind of collate it all together so that when you come to exam day and you tackle requirement one, you've kind of got this to hand. And we'll think about the technique for requirement one shortly. So then with requirement two, as I said, in requirement two, we'll be doing a calculation of a proposal. Now, it's quite often that this was quite heavily flagged in the AI, and it absolutely was the case in the 2021 exams. So there was a product launch evaluation process. So again, the type of information provided in the AI, we were told some information about a previous product, and we were told things, that made it a success and things which perhaps weren't as successful. We were reminded of the key calculation, very important to have that to hand. Now, of course, what we were told is we were told a lot of information about what had happened previously when they'd launched products. And we were given examples of typical costs, and we were explained why they were higher or lower than estimated. Now, of course, that's going to be very useful because, as I said, if you think about what are we doing in requirement two, yes, we're doing a calculation, but we're going to question the assumptions. We're going to challenge the assumptions, but we need something to challenge them too. So, in the exam, we're going to be provided with all of these assumptions to do the calculations. Formulation costs for the recipe will be this, marketing costs will be this. But in our answer, we're going to want to challenge those assumptions, and we're going to want to say why they may be higher or lower. Of course, we need to have some kind of basis to challenge them, and that's why we're kind of told this past experience. So we've got something to compare it back to. So that's where this information is particularly useful. And it can be very useful to collate all of the assumptions, so you kind of have them all together. So you've got them next to you in the exam. So when you're doing your assumption sections in requirement two, you've got something you can quickly critique them all to. That's very useful to have in the exam. So the other useful parts in the AI would be things like the media articles, because that sometimes gives us some background on some of the ethics issues. So that's in terms of requirement two. And then we have requirement three. So as I said, similar to requirement two, the issue or the area we might be looking at is quite often flagged in the AI. And again, it certainly was here. So similar to requirement two, we told some background on the issue. And of course, we're looking at the benefits and risks. So there may be some kind of benefits and risks which are already flagged in the AI, which therefore might be relevant. We're quite often told a bit about some of the parties involved in the requirement. So who is actually involved here? So like POM, for example, we were told some information about them in the AI, and therefore, they've come into the actual proposal in the actual exam. So therefore it would be useful to kind of bring those points in. Again, there was a calculation there, and again, some perhaps assumptions that we could question things back to. And then again, the media articles may give us some background on some of the ethics issues as well. So it's quite important to just appreciate what is in the AI that's useful for each requirement and what is in the exam paper that's useful for each requirement. And I think this is really useful to do, particularly at the stage you're at now, just before the AI is released, because once you kind of appreciate that, where each exhibit in the AI tends to feature in the exam, when you read through your AI, you'll be able to read it more actively and in a more exam focused way, because you'll read through an exhibit and think, yes, that's probably going to be an assumption in requirement two, or this is probably flagging a potential requirement three, or this is a reason why revenue's gone up, or this is a target, a revenue target for them, and therefore I should include that in my requirement one analysis. So then once you've got an understanding of what each of the three requirements involves, what information is provided in the AI and what information is provided in the exam paper, then what is really crucial is that you understand how case study is marked. So if you get some recent marking keys, either from mock exams or actual exams, it's really important you get familiar with the marking key for case study. So we've got these various boxes. Now to pass a box, you need to get at least 3 points in it. If you get 3 points in it, you'll get an SC. If you get 4 points in it, you'll get a CC. And therefore, if you get 5 or 6, you still get a CC. So actually, if you've got 4 points, then that's kind of the optimal, because actually, if you get 5 or 6, those additional points you've put, it's very good that they're actually correct, but actually that they're worth as much as almost an incorrect point, because they're not scoring you any more marks. So there is quite a balancing act here. You really do get rewarded in the case study exam for coverage and balance. So that's kind of really important. You kind of appreciate that from the outset. You're targeting 3 or 4 points in each box, ideally 4, of course. So actually, if you look at, plenty of papers, and I'm sure you will be attempting lots of, mock exams as part of your preparation, it's really important that you focus carefully on the marking key and you understand what all of the various boxes are, because they are fairly consistent between each exam. And therefore, the marking key is quite transparent for this exam. Well, it's very transparent, for this exam, and it's really worth, investing the time, understanding it, kind of appreciating it, so that you can keep it, in your mind's eye, on exam day. So as you'd expect, for requirement 1, there's going to be a few boxes for revenue based on the one we looked at, cost of sales, gross profit. And we've got a couple here for the one-off piece of analysis. And these are always the same. So conclusions, recommendations, Appendix 1, calculating the numbers correctly, and then the context box, so bringing in relevant points from the AI and other context points, perhaps from the exam paper. So what you need to be making sure that you do is that you pass at least half of the boxes on each requirement. So you're passing at least 6 boxes in each of requirement 1, 2, and 3. Now you ideally want to be, passing many more boxes than that. None of them are incredibly difficult. There are a few tricky ones here and there, but it is very reasonable to aim for, kind of 8, 9 boxes. I mean, it isn't completely out of the question to get all 11. So it's really important that you do this with, each requirement and the executive summary. I can't stress enough how valuable it is to really understand the marking key, because then what you need to do to pass. At the end of the day, it all comes down to, marks and making sure that you've passed enough boxes. So really invest the time kind of understanding and appreciating this. So once you've got that understanding of the marking key and how that works, then you need to work on your exam technique. So you need to learn the exam technique, which will ensure that you hit, all of the boxes. So, how do you go from this being the requirement? So let's take requirement 1, for example. How do you go from this being the requirement? Yes, you kind of know, what the boxes roughly are, but, what should you actually kind of write down to make sure you get everything? Which order should you do everything? How should you read the exam paper? Which bit should you start with? And that all comes down, of course, to exam technique. So I won't be able to go through, a full exam paper today and do it, because as you know, it's a 4-hour exam and we don't have that much time. But we do have a video available on our website. So this is on the case study page of the ACA Masters website. So we do have a video available where you can watch me go through a full requirement and kind of work through it all and explain what you need to do for each section. So that video is free. So now I strongly suggest that you go away and watch this after the class, so you can see me kind of work through a full requirement from reading it to analysing the information in the exam paper to then typing up the full report. And this is where, exam technique is absolutely everything. You need to think about, your appendix. When you have all of your prior year numbers here, as I've demonstrated, this will all be kind of pre-prepared. So you'd have this for you in the exam. You'll have all the prior year information for your appendix. So you'd be able to kind of put that in, do the 2021 numbers. Personally, when I look at the requirement, I would just focus on the first bit first of all, which of course is revenue. So calculate my revenue numbers and the movements, and then I would type up my revenue analysis. So of course you can calculate the year-on-year movements. You can do some further analysis like revenue mix, revenue per client. Of course, this varies between each case study business, but the technique is broadly the same every time. And then you'd come on and type up your revenue section. And then every time what you are trying to do here is we're trying to say revenue has gone up or down. So in this case, disappointingly, it's gone down. So you can see here that we have given the number, we've said it's gone down disappointingly. So you can see here, so this is looking at vets. You can see here, vets, so the number has gone down. Now that can be in the appendix or in the report, but we'll get that point there first of all. So that's nice and easy. So I've said that it's gone down. Then I'm going to give the reason it's gone down. Now I'm always trying to get that reason from the exam paper. So I'd have read through this information and analysed it, but would usually be given a reason why vets revenue had gone down. So revenue from that particular channel had gone down. So we've got the number, the reason. So you can see this is the mark for the number. This is the mark for the reason. And then I'd always try to give some further insight points. So here I've looked at the number of clients has decreased, and I've looked at the average revenue per client. So this bit's quite easy, the number, calculating the number, the year-on-year change, very easy. Picking up the reason, which is usually from the exam paper, again, not too difficult. We've done the same thing in CR, SBM, BST, use the exam paper information as much as you can. They've given us kind of the reason there, not too difficult. Now, this is the trickier part, and is why it's in kind of this column here. What we need to look at is, identify a trend. Is this the second or the third year, perhaps, that it's gone down? Or can we do some further analysis of the numbers? We said, vets has gone down. What we could do is, because we had also had here the number of clients, we could work out average revenue per client and compare that to the prior year. So doing a bit more further analysis on the numbers. Definitely tricky to do. Not tricky to do, but more difficult than obviously, this is the number, it's gone up. Here's the reason from the exam paper, which the examiner has basically just given us on a plate. This is more difficult skill, but not too difficult. Chartered accountant, advanced level, you've done CR, SBM probably, or you're doing them soon. It's not too difficult. And then we're looking for a context point as well. So we can see number, reason, further insight point, context, and you can see how we could kind of rack up the mark. So looking here at number of clients or average revenue per client as well. So we pick up that point, and then we'd be looking for a context point as well. So price-based competition has increased due to concentration of clients. And that, of course, is coming from the AI. And I think it was also mentioned again in the exam paper. And you can see that there. So you can see that we're kind of doing the same thing every time. So then I move on, and then I do the next revenue channel, and it's the same thing, number, reason. So we've got the number here, reason, so due to the discounts. So we were told here that there had been some discounting, and we were told what the RRP value of sales were. So that was our reason there from the exam paper. a further insight point, and a context point. So you can see then I'll be doing the same thing here with pets. So number, mark, reason, further insight, and then hopefully picking up a context point. So you can kind of see, we do the same thing every time, and then we go through cost of sales and gross profit and do something similar. So this is just an example of one section of the exam technique that I suggest you use for case study and a technique taught during my courses. So you can see, once you've understood the marking key and how it works, then of course you need the technique to make sure, how do I get as many of these points as possible, but within the time? Because, it's no good me or you spending lots and lots of time on revenue, and yes, you get it perfect, but then you run out of time. So it's a balancing act. You want to kind of make sure you get 4, maybe even 5 points, just to give you a bit of margin of safety. But then you need to move on within time. So it's what do you need to get down to get the marks, but also how do you do it in a really efficient way, because time is a scarce resource and you need to attempt everything. It's no good getting 11 clearly competence on requirement 1, the same on requirement 2, and then only doing half of requirement 3, because you'll fail the exam. You have to pass each requirement in isolation. So you have to have the exam technique which enables you to get everything down in the time, but crucially within the time. So then, during the classes, we go through how to tackle, each section, of the exam, what to do with the, one-off piece of analysis, and how to tackle conclusions in the exec summary. But all of this is kind of geared. So this is kind of like the technique, which is like perfected, just to make sure that you get everything and you get a clearly competent in every box, or certainly very close to it. If you get, like 8 or 9 clearly competence and a few SCs, then obviously that's like an exceptional performance. I mean, it is, of course, difficult sometimes. Some of the points, particularly in these boxes, I know students struggle with. And also it's frustrating that sometimes you might put a really good point and it's not on the marking key. So there is an element almost of luck, almost of a bit of good fortune at times. But generally, if you use the exam paper information and you've really understood the business, then you should be able to pick up most of the points which are relevant. So it talks to quite a bit about requirement 1, but of course, it's the same with the other requirements as well. As I said, the assumptions is really important in requirement 2, critiquing those as much as you can. So again, you'll do your calculation for Appendix 2. One thing I like to do is, highlight the assumptions as I go through. So then you'll deliver the results first of all and analyze those results, which is really important. But then you can go through and question the assumptions one by one. And of course, with our AI analysis document, you've got them all in one place. So it's really easy to do that. So students who did this exam back in November, so my students doing a video course and a live course, had all of this with them. So they would have found it really easy to just go through and critique all of these assumptions back to the previous experience in the AI. But again, there's a certain technique you need to use when you're questioning those assumptions to make sure that you do exactly what the examiner is looking for. Some students tend to just state the assumptions. They just write the assumptions down. But that's not what you're doing. You're critiquing the assumptions. So you're saying why they're going to be higher or lower or different, or why something's missing, and justifying why. So again, there's a certain technique that you need to be using for each section to make sure that you deliver exactly what the examiner is looking for and within the time, because that is the only way that you're going to be able to get CC and SCs in every box, which is what we are aiming for here. So then, of course, once you've understood the technique and you've seen me kind of deliver the technique, of course, it's up to you then, to practice. Just watching me do it isn't going to ingrain it into you. The only way you're going to have it ingrained into you is by practice, just like with anything in life, really. The only way you're going to truly master it is if you practice it yourself. So that's why, we produce mock exams so that you have the opportunity to go away and practice. And of course, past papers are very useful as well, because like I said, the exam is in the same format every time. So now's a great opportunity to work on your exam technique. And I know lots of you will be doing mock exams as part of your preparation. So what we'll do is we'll talk specifically about some of the requirements. We've talked about requirement 1 a bit, but I'll kind of give you like my top tips for each requirement, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions. So with requirement 1, and this really does apply to all of them, but read the requirement very carefully. I know it does sound quite elementary, but even at this level, it's amazing how many people don't read the requirement very carefully. So, of course, the marks are going to be for answering a specific requirement. I think this is perhaps probably the biggest danger in requirement 1, because it does seem quite predictable from the AI, and students tend to kind of think quite a lot in advance about what they're going to have in their analysis. And, they've noticed that revenue has gone down in the last 2 years. So they're just absolutely dying to say that, it's gone down for a 3rd year. Or, maybe something like in admin or distribution, they've noticed that as a percentage of revenue, it's gone up in each of the last 3 years. And, they think this is a really good point. It's really eroding, the operating profit margin, and, really keen to kind of talk about that and how that's unsustainable for the business, because they're thinking, oh, that'll definitely get me, a mark in, this box here. But if the exam says revenue, cost of sales, and gross profit, there will not be marks for analysing admin and distribution and talking at length about operating profit. So read this once, read it twice, be very clear on exactly what you're being asked for, and then use this as a headings in the report. So make sure that in your report, you use these as your headings, because it will keep you focused and make sure that you only answer what you've been required to ask. I quite often see papers and either the appendix has numbers calculated in it which weren't needed, like admin, distribution, and operating profit. Or perhaps, even worse, or perhaps sometimes both, there's a whole section on, operating profit in here, and there just won't be marks for it, because that's not what the client has asked for. So it's really important that you do that. And then once you've got it as your headings, that will then keep you focused in your conclusions, because you'll look back up to each section and be like, oh, I need a conclusion on each section. And of course, each section is based on the requirement wording. Therefore, in your conclusions, you're going to have a conclusion on everything that was asked for in the requirement wording. So it's like requirement wording feeds into report headings, feeds into conclusions, and it all kind of like agrees and, ties in. And therefore, it's going to make sure that each part of your report is focused on exactly what you have been asked for. So as I mentioned, use the exam paper information for reasons why things have gone up or down, and the further analysis of the numbers. Again, this does apply to all of the requirements, but use this information as much as possible. Use the information the examiner has given you. So as I said, some of it's in like narrative form, some of it's like numerical, so financial. So everything they give you, think, how can I use this in my answer? Particularly the numbers, how can I kind of like analyze these numbers more? Because across all the ACA exams, I would say in 99.9% of cases, when the examiners give you something in the exam paper like this, they want you to use it. There's something to find out. There's something interesting to find out. There's some underlying trend or some interesting analysis you can do. Believe me, I've done plenty of ACA exams. And like I said, in almost every circumstance, when the examiner gives you something, you can use it in your answer to score a mark. And again, I think with the AI, this is again the danger for a lot of students, that they've spent so long on the AI, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, discussing it with their colleagues, thinking of particular reasons why something's gone up or down, and you're just too focused on the AI, you've almost like programmed yourself to you've already decided what you're going to write in requirement one. And therefore, students kind of see this as just kind of a bit of a skim over task, and you might use it if it fits in, sort of thing, to what you'd already planned. Your approach should be the complete opposite. You want to be coming in and using this information as much as you can, and only bringing in the AI points if it definitely fits in. So, in some ways, I think it can almost sometimes be more of a risk if you over prepare on the AI than under prepare on the AI. Because actually, I'm not advising either. You should prepare on the AI, but just be aware that you shouldn't force too many points into it. But of course, someone who is underprepared would, of course, have no choice but to use the exam paper information more because they're not as familiar with the AI, but they'd actually probably do better on the exam than someone who is overly focused on the AI and is just trying to use that as much as possible in their answer. So really use the exam paper information as much as you can. So then with the additional piece of analysis, so in this case, it was the Hugh Logan KPI issue that we had here. So a lot of students kind of think, and I can see why they think that, you have to get this right. I mean, you have to be really thorough here, really comprehensive here in order to pass. It's specifically kind of called out here. Just bear in mind, it is only worth 2 boxes. Now, I'm absolutely not suggesting don't attempt it, because that's going to, really put you in a difficult position if you start getting not attempted. But, it can be difficult. It can be tricky. There can be numbers in there. You might be coming towards the end of your time. And so, what I would suggest is just kind of bear in mind that actually, if you've done thorough revenue and profit analysis, attempt this, 3 or 4 points ideally, but don't feel as though you have to overrun in order to get this absolutely right. Even if you've got 2 points here, even if you've got 1 here and 2 here, if you've done really well on the rest of the requirement, and then you can move on and get your conclusions, which are relatively easy to do, and get a few recommendations, which again, if you're using our pro forma report, then we probably would have thought of some good recommendations for you as well. Then you should be able to pass comfortably. You could end up with SC and CC in all of these boxes, and even if you got an IC and an ID here, you still pass comfortably. Probably the worst thing you could do would be to spend an extra 20 minutes here, and that eats into your requirement 2 and your requirement 3. And what will probably end up happening is, if you were to fail, you'd probably realize you failed in requirement 3. And actually, when you look back at requirement 1, you've passed 9 or 10 boxes. So actually, you spent your 20 minutes here chasing boxes you didn't need, and the price you paid was on requirement 3, and that's actually where you failed. Instead, if you'd moved on, you would have got those other bits on requirement 3. So really important to be thorough with your numbers. Obviously, this is a financial report, and just make sure that you are thorough with the numbers. So I always suggest give the absolute change and the percentage change. I know in the exam there's a backslash, and you could technically have either or, but put both in there just to be on the safe side in case you do a typo with one. Like I said, getting the number right is an easy bit. So therefore, you wouldn't want to have 6.7 and then in the heat of the moment you do 7.6, and then all of a sudden you've dropped a really easy mark. Whereas at least if you did that and you've got the 814K there, then you've kind of got that as a backup. But then sometimes I see people, they drop numbers out of the conclusions. You need to be just as thorough with the numbers in the conclusions and in the exec summary. So be short and concise with points. If you look at my model answers, you can see I've got a very concise writing style. So the obvious advantage of that, the obvious benefit is, of course, time. So somebody can make those 4 points I made in 100 words in a nice, really explained paragraph, really well written, and it's kind of co-joining words, etc. But there's no mark for that on the marking key. It's did you make the point? If you did, you got the mark. So be concise. You still have to write in full sentences, but you can be concise. You don't need lots of flowery language, as you might do in a real report, but as you would in like an academic essay, for example. So there's no marks for excellent use of vocabulary and things like that. And it has to be coherent, and it has to be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be structured in a certain way. And this point needs to lead on to this point to build this argument, and then it will have like the counter arguments further below. It's not like an essay. So short and concise will win the day. So in terms of your planning, now I know some people may have spent kind of 2 hours kind of planning in the past. I really don't think it's necessary. I think once you've understood the technique to use for the exam, and you understand the marking key, and you understand how to use the exam paper and focus on the requirement and how to write your points in a nice, short, concise way, you actually probably don't need to do much planning in the exam, because you can put most of your points on as you go. Now we prepare our pro forma report before every exam, so you kind of already have your plan laid out. You can see here, this is what we had before the exam. So we'd already thought about how we'd structure revenue across the different channels. We thought about the number, the reason from the exam paper, the type of further insight points to include, and the context points as well to include in the answer. So actually, you've already got your plan for every requirement here. And we've got the plan here for each section. You've already got that going into the exam. We prepare that for students in advance. Of course, you're going to have to flex this based on what comes up in the exam. So revenue, cost of sales, and gross profit were required. Operating profit wasn't. So therefore you wouldn't have a section on this in the actual exam. And of course, a one-off piece of analysis, it will depend on what that is, but you've got some reminders here of the points to include. So this will save you a great amount of time. Now, of course, you may want to do some planning either mentally or maybe on here, for example. So we can see revenue from vets has increased due to, and you need to get the reason from the exam paper. So maybe when you're reading through the exam paper and you realize, oh, this first point, where am I going to use that in my answer? Oh yes, that's going to be the reason why vets has gone up. And then you could just pop it onto your plan here, maybe scribble it on here, and then you can kind of do that as you go through. So you're just kind of like updating the plan, if you like, or just tailoring it slightly. But for the rest of the points, I think you can kind of just put those on as you go. You've got reminders of all the types of points to include in your answer. So again, that will help you save time. And then as I've explained before, we need to be really efficient with our time so we can get as many marks down as possible. So then with requirements 2 and 3, I think people are really good at doing the calculation, calculating the number that's required, and then putting in like the results. But what people tend to do is they describe the results. So they tend to say things like, materials will be 170k in 2022 and 340k in 2023. Across both years, it'll be 510. And they do this in the report, whereas the person reading the report can just see that. So what you have in your results section is you have the headline number, whatever they've asked for, which is ROI, and then you need to analyze the numbers. That's what's important, is that you analyze the numbers. So in this one, there was a target, which was the obvious thing to compare it to. But the other things you should do is sensitivity analysis. So you can flex one or two of the assumptions in the calculation. So of course, we know in the assumption section, we're going to question all of these assumptions. In the exam paper, we were told all of the various assumptions. So marketing costs will be this. And we said, what we're going to do is say, that's unrealistic because, in the past they were 30K. And therefore you could flex that number just by changing it. And of course, in the spreadsheet software now, that's going to update and change your results. Maybe copy and paste it, have a flex calculation, and you could change this. So just do some sensitivity analysis that way. I'll do that in requirement 2 and in requirement 3. Other analysis you could do of the results, we're looking at this project, okay, it's 800K of revenue. Well, if you look at that, in the context of the overall business, where revenue for the most recent year was 16 million, then you can say, whether it's significant or not. So you can see you give the headline number, but then you do some more analysis. You can look at how much revenue is it adding to the existing business? How does the gross profit margin compare to what the profit margin currently is in the business? Has the company got enough cash? So that's what you would have in that section there. But sensitivity analysis, when you look back at previous marking keys, you won't see many marks for it, but going forward, it will be worth more marks. So make sure you do that, and you'll see that in our mock exams. We'll be doing that in our mock exams. You can see how to do it in order to maximize your marks. So as I've said, identify which assumptions are unrealistic. So when they're inconsistent with the AI or requirement 1. So as we've said, usually there'll be something in the AI that we can compare the assumptions back to, or maybe even in requirement 1. So if, for example, it's assuming that sales volume is going to go up by 20%, but we know in the most recent year it fell by 5%, then we would say sales volume is likely to be lower because in the most recent year it was only 5%. So you're always saying why it could be higher or lower, but then justifying why. That's what we're doing here with the assumptions. But always try to compare it to something. Don't just say RRP could be higher or sales volumes could be lower. Always justify why. As with requirement 1, use the exam paper information as much as you can. That's just a constant theme, and you'll see that in our mock exams, where we use that as much as possible in the answer, and you should do that because it tends to be that the points on the marking key are for using the exam paper information. It tends to be that any points from the AI tend to be kind of in this context box, but generally most of the other points are used from the exam paper. So bring in the AI points where relevant, but really try to use that exam paper information as much as you can. So it's really important to be thorough with ethics. So when ethics comes up, it will be 2 boxes. And it tends to be there's like 5 or 6 different ethics issues. So it's really important that you're thorough with ethics. There's 11 boxes, 2 are for ethics. Really important that you get as many points down for ethics as you can. So try to identify as many different ethics issues and be thorough with it as well. Don't just say kind of what the issue is. Say what the impact could possibly be, for the company in question. So I think here in this one, we were told that the company was going to market it based on all of these kind of particular claims like better heart health, improved cardiovascular performance, higher nutrient density, etc., etc. But then actually in one of the media articles, it says some of these claims are a bit contentious. And we knew from the AI that rival firms were prepared to challenge claims made by other firms in the industry. So you can see how the AI is relevant. It often provides some kind of context to some of the issues. So therefore, we could say that this product is going to be marketed based on the health benefits. These may be contentious. Competitors are prepared to challenge the claims. We've identified what the issue is, and then we've said what the impact would be on DGS, like reputational damage. And then we've got like a recommendation, make sure the claims can be supported. And then I moved on to the next ethics issue. So what the issue is. So this was about the dog food being heavily regulated, and there was an issue here with some of the new suppliers. And then we said what the impact would be on the business, and again like a recommendation of something to do. So I'm really thorough. It's like almost like with my revenue section, how I went through each revenue channel. number, reason, further insight, context, but just doing it over and over again, making sure I cover all the different channels. Again, with ethics, just making sure I'm doing this for each ethics issue so that I'm just racking up the points here every time. So if a few of my points aren't on here, I'm still going to get 4 in each box and get that clearly competent, that kind of golden mark. So like I said, ethics will be worth 2 boxes if it comes up. So lots of marks up for grabs there. So the context box as well. So it tends to be that the points in these boxes relate back to the AI or requirement 1. So like I said, the AI usually gives us some context on, these proposals. So this is where the AI can be quite useful. What do we know about this new product proposal, from the AI, which points are in there, which are relevant to this particular proposal. When we saw this for requirement 2, and then was the new website wasn't there for requirement 3. So yeah, it looks a lot at requirement 2. So like in requirement 3, for example, we can make some points in the context section about PRM. They're a digital marketing agency. We know they've got experience in increasing traffic for clients because we knew that from the AI. Therefore, they'll be well suited to this project. So, like I said, requirement 2 or 3 will usually link back to the AI, and therefore the AI can be quite useful here. So, I know I've said a lot, use the exam paper information as much as possible. Don't force the AI points in. I'm not saying the AI is completely useless, but I'm saying that's what tends to happen. Students tend to overly focus on the AI and tend to try and push points from the AI into their answer. Where they're not always entirely relevant. Where they are entirely relevant, absolutely bring them in. But it tends to be that's more the issue that students have. So a lot of people get worried about the calculations, and it's almost a little bit like what I said about requirement 1 on that one-off piece of analysis. That's not essential to pass. You need to attempt it. I'm not saying don't do it. It doesn't matter. But I'm saying it's not essential to pass. So even if it doesn't go that well, you can still easily pass requirement 1. And it's the same with the calculations in requirement 2 and requirement 3. Again, because it's such a fundamental part of the question, when you look at the requirement, it feels like, that is the main part of the question. People think that, I absolutely need to get the numbers correct. But actually step back, look at the big picture. And again, this is why it's important to understand the marking key. There's 11 boxes, 2 or 3 are for the numbers. I mean, this is just for having a neat appendix. This is for putting in the right numbers. You're usually just getting them from the exam paper. This tends to be for the calculation. Sometimes there's 2 boxes for the calculations. So this one can be quite difficult, and if there's another one as well. But actually, you could still pass this requirement if you did well on ethics, you picked up the relevant context points, you questioned the assumptions, you concluded on every section and did your recommendations. You could still, you could get the calculations quite wrong and still come out with 8 or 9 boxes, 9 or 10 boxes, depending if there's 1 or 2 here, if you picked up these easy ones. So again, if the calculation doesn't quite go to plan, just, sense check your answer. If there's a few little bits you didn't know how to do, just make sure you've kind of got most of the things in there. Make sure you've got the right total so you come up with a broadly sensible answer. So, if it is profitable, you want your answer to obviously give a profit. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time talking about, them making a loss and it being a drain on cash. And, therefore you might end up having lots of wrong narrative points as a result. And that could be, an issue. But as long as your answer is broadly correct, for here, for example, if you didn't know how to calculate, some of these costs, but you'd still ended up with the other numbers being sensible, you could still get, all of the other points. You can still analyze the results, etc. So I hope that's kind of quite clear. You might get some of the headline numbers wrong, but actually you could compare the profit margin to the existing profit. You could see if they've got enough cash. You can question the assumptions. You could get all of the strategic operational benefits and risks because they tend to be quite independent. You could do ethics and conclude and recommend. So yeah, don't panic too much on the calculation if you don't get it exactly correct. There's a few bits which are difficult. Just take a logical approach, one number at a time. do the best you can, and make sure you come up with an answer which broadly looks sensible. Because the calculation will be quite similar to something you've seen before. So you should be able to kind of sense check your answer. Like I said, with requirement 1, just be short and concise. You can see from my answers, I'm short and concise. I'm just trying to make, good example here is these benefits and risks. Short, concise, not bullet points, still writing in full sentences, still like explaining, still being quite clear what the point is. The EGS will be less dependent on key clients such as tailors. And then I make a different point. Recurring purchases will make production scheduling more easier. Will make production scheduling easier. So you can see here, I'm just making a different point every time. I'm being really short and concise. That's what you want to do, because you can see, what game I'm playing here. I'm just trying to get as many different points down as I can, so I get as many different marks. It's about how many points you get in a box. It isn't how well was a point explained. Was it really developed? Was it part of a coherent argument? It's like, no, did you make the point? And they're all different points. So I'm trying to make as many different points. And it's a time pressured exam. So I'm trying to make as many different points as quickly as possible. So, the way to do that is to write concisely and to leave a line between each point. Again, like I said, our pro forma report is the plan. You don't need a separate plan for requirement 2 or 3 either. You've got it here, all the different sections, what goes under each section. Yes, of course, you have to flex it based on what actually comes up in the exam, but you know what the marking key will look like. High level, what the marking key will look like, the points that will be in each box, what you need to do in order to get those points, and therefore you can have your kind of plan pre-prepared before going into the exam. But like I said, you have to focus on the requirement wording. So therefore, this is going to drive your headings. You can't really completely predict those entirely, but some of them stay the same, like assumptions, conclusions, context, results, and financial analysis. But whatever the examiner asks for, use those as your headings. And then the types of points which go into each section are broadly the same from exam to exam. So again, lots of practice, as I've said before, once you've understood what you need to do for each requirement, what information is provided in the AI and the exam paper, and how a case study is marked, then once you've got this technique, all you need to do is practice it, and you'll master, what goes into each section, and it'll become second nature to you, like it is to me. If I did the exam again today, I wouldn't need like a plan, or I know what the marking key looks like. It's in my head. I know what goes under each section. I know exactly what I need to produce. I know exactly what the examiner is looking for. All I need is the exam paper with the information in, which gives me the reasons why things have gone up or down. I'd go into the exam with my AI analysis. So I've got all my assumptions for requirement 2, something to critique them back to. I've got my calculations. I've got my reasons why things have gone up or down in the past. I've got my issues from all of the other exhibits. I've got my pro forma report here as a reminder for what to have for each section. But I know what the marking key looks like. It's already in my head. When I look at the requirement, I already know there will be 2 boxes for revenue, and cost of sales and gross profit will probably share a box, and there'll be one for the KPI issue. I know there'll be conclusions, recommendations. So it's already all there because I've just practiced it so many times. And that's what you need to do in order to master your exam technique. So in order for you to do that, of course, you need to understand the exam technique first of all. And, like I've said, there's a free video here. So absolutely, make the most of that, because you can watch me work through a requirement 1 in full. So you can see me work through this requirement 1. I'll do it in full. I'll explain what you need to do for each section, how to use the pro forma report, what you need to do for each section in the report, how to do the Appendix 1, how to do the conclusions, what you need to have in there, what to not have in there can also be just as important, and then how to do the exec summary as well. And then, of course, there's also videos on requirement 2 and requirement 3, which are part of the video course. So the first class is like the free sample class, but it's a whole class. It's like a 3-hour class, so absolutely watch that. Then there's a requirement 2 video, which is exactly the same as you probably imagine, just on requirement 2. I'll work through requirement 2 and explain what you need to do for each section. And yeah, I'm sure you can guess what's in the requirement 3 video. So then there'll be the AI analysis video as well, part of the video course. So that's due to be released on the 21st of June. And so I'll be working through the AI, the July 22 AI. I would have produced a document similar to this. So I'd have analyzed the management accounts. I'd have identified, what all the relevant points are as to why things have gone up or down in the past, the trends, the areas of significance. I'll be working through each exhibit, explaining where each piece of information is likely to be useful in the exam. So analysis of the management accounts, all of the other exhibits as well, saying what is an area of significance, what pieces of information you can ignore, where everything is likely to come up in the exam. So really useful class that to help you have an exam focused approach to your AI analysis. And then we'll be doing our 3 mock exams based on the July exam. So there will of course be my pro forma report for you to use in the exam, and then 3 mock exams, like this, which will come with, the marking key and the model answer. So there'll be videos where I'll be debriefing those, and I'll be explaining exactly how you should have interpreted the exam paper, the types of points you should be including in your answer, so that it'll get you really well prepared for your exam in July. So that's what the video course includes. It's the exam technique for each requirement, then analysis of the AI, and then a debrief of the 3 mock exams, so you know exactly what points you should be including in each section of your answer. So as I explained, we'll have our AI analysis, mock exams, and the pro forma report available for July 2022. Now, in the meantime, what you can do is you can go away and practice this exam technique. You can watch the classes for requirements 1, 2, and 3, and then you can go away and practice them. Now, I know many of you, if not all of you, will have been attempting this mock exam, the November 21 exam, as part of your practice. So if you've already been through this advanced information, then you could go away, watch the video where I teach you the exam technique to use, and then you can download our mock exams here. So you can download these. You've got the AI analysis ready for you to use in the exam, but you can download our 3 mock exams as well. So these are free to download, so you can practice. So you can just practice your several requirement 1s, one after the other. You don't have to sit there for the full 4 hours. You could do several requirement 1s, one after the other, and just practice that technique I've taught you in the video class, so that you can produce an answer, like my model answer. This has just come from practice, and you too can get up to that same standard. So watch the video class where I teach you the exam technique to use, and then go and put it into practice with these mock exams that you have here. And like I said, if you've already read through the AI, get the most out of it. You invested that time reading it. You've understood DGS, or if you haven't done DGS, if you've done House Pride, they're here as well. If you've done both, even better. You spent that time reading the AI, get the most out of it. You can do 3 more exams on it now to practice your technique. It's all about exam technique at the end of the day, understanding what the different boxes are in the marking key, how to make sure you get those points. And then, of course, our July 22 mock exams will be available. Here are the dates here. But yes, that'll be, pro forma report. It'd be exactly the same as this. It'd be a pro forma report, AI analysis, mock exams with the marking keys and my model answers. So you'll know exactly what to produce on exam day in order to get those top marks for your final ACA exam. So we do have a live course as well. It's now full for July, but we do have spaces for November if there's any of you who are doing the exam in November. But the live course is full for July. But like I said, the video course is still available, which teaches the same exam techniques. So it's the same content, just in a video format. So you can watch it as and when suits you. So I will be posting, some tips and some heads ups and some, bit of advice and maybe some short videos on my LinkedIn page. So please feel free to connect with me on there if we aren't connected already. There's also the ACA Masters LinkedIn page as well, and the YouTube channel, which again will post some case study content onto each of those. So I suggest connecting and following each of those, the YouTube channel and the LinkedIn pages. On the ACA Masters website, we've got our blogs. There's a case study article there in our blog. It's also quite useful sometimes to look at student feedback. You see there's a lot of students who have struggled with case study, and most of them feel as though it was kind of down to technique. So mark improvement by 25%. Some students failed with 45 and then ended up getting 71, and you can see that it's all down to learning the technique, hitting the boxes, understanding the marking grid, something they struggled with previously, mock exams. You'll kind of see the theme of what it took from students who were struggling to kind of get them over the line, 39 to 65. So you can see here, exam technique is all very much here about exam technique, after 4 failed attempts and then getting a 64, very comfortable pass, all about, again, exam technique. It's what the, constant theme is here. So, 45 to 74. So it really is, all about exam technique. So 67 from, 37. And yeah, it really is all about exam technique. I really can't emphasize it enough, really. So yeah, had some excellent marks, had some 82s, 90s. So yeah, sometimes useful to see some other student insights. So what we'll do now is we'll stop and we'll take some questions. I know one question which came in advance was about timings. So you have to pass each requirement in isolation. So I would give each requirement the same amount of time. So some of you might want to spend a few minutes at the start, have 5 minutes at the start just to read the requirements. I mean, personally, I just got on with requirement 1. I think I might have had in fact, I didn't even want to look at requirement 2 or 3 because I just thought, why look at them now when I know I'm going to spend the next hour and 20 minutes doing requirement 1? I just don't even want to think about requirement 2 or 3 yet. I know roughly what it's going to be. And even if it's something different, it's something different. There's no need to read it now. So I just got on with requirement 1. But if you want to read all of them, then you could spend a few minutes doing that at the start. Some might just want to do it for reassurance that, yes, there is only 3. Yes, they are broadly similar to the past. The examiners aren't, going to be unfair, and there's not going to be 4 requirements, or they're not going to be like so fundamentally different to anything else that has been or could be expected. I now probably allocate my time to each. Now, you might want to flex these slightly depending on how quickly you can get through them. Appendix 1 quite often takes some people longer. You may even want to break it down even more. You may even want to say, 15 minutes on revenue, 15 minutes cost of sales, gross profit, 15 minutes on the adjustment, 15 minutes conclusions, recommendations, and exec summary. So you could break it down even to a more micro level. It is quite personal, this, because some people are really quick at crunching numbers, but slower typing, and vice versa. So you do want to tailor this slightly, but start with this as a starting point, see how you go, monitor yourself, time it when you do it, and then kind of see how you want to adjust it as you go. So that's what, I would suggest there. But again, even more important to practice a lot, because obviously if you practice a lot, you'll start to learn where you're quick and where you're not as quick. And like I said, even if you just do like a requirement 1 on its own, one evening, and requirement 2 another evening, then you'll start to be able to kind of time yourself and see how you get on and go from there. But yeah, I hope that's addressed that question there that came in on timing. So do we have any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or feel free to type them in on the chat box. If I could give one prize winner tip only, what would it be? Well, that's a really good question. Well, I would say use the exam paper information as much as you can. That would be my number 1 tip. So it kind of applies to all the requirements. So as I've said before, whether it's narrative information, whether it's additional information which is numerical or financial, use this information as much as you can. Like, analyze it. Don't just like copy it and put it into your answer. That's not what I mean. I mean, the examiner's giving you this information. Think, how do I use this information to answer what they've specifically asked for? That would be my number 1 tip. But yeah, it's a really good question. Not one I've had before. So the next question is, please can you explain the exec summary in terms of how to approach it? Could you copy the conclusion on each requirement over and amend accordingly, or type a refresh overview on each requirement? So a very good question, a very popular question that many students ask. So of course, a conclusion and a summary by nature are very similar. So if you conclude on something or you write a summary on something, so if you think back to requirement 1, revenue, cost of sales, gross profit, and the one-off piece of analysis, obviously in our answer, you'd have your analysis of revenue overall by each channel, cost of sales, each line, gross profit, the KPI issue, several points on that. So when you need to conclude on each, you can't just, you need to conclude on it, you need to kind of summarize on it. So I would take the headline point from each section. So if it's asked you for revenue overall and each channel, then I would take like the main point from above on each. So I would take the main point on revenue overall, each channel, cost of sales. It didn't ask for cost of sales each line, it just asked for cost of sales in total, gross profit, and like the main point from the KPI issue. So of course, your concluding points aren't any different than what's in the main body of the report. If overall revenue went up by 4%, it went up by 4% from this to this. That's factual. And if that's a reasonable performance, your conclusion point isn't going to be any different from your main body point. So you could rewrite it, or you could, if you were to copy and paste it or rewrite it, it's going to look broadly the same anyway. So then, of course, in your exec summary, again, you need to summarize, but you're summarizing on the same requirement, on the same request, analysis of revenue by each channel, cost of sales, gross profit, KPI issue. So concluding on it and summarizing it are very similar tasks. And actually, we're talking about factual information here. Revenue's gone up, cost of sales have gone up, gross profit margin's gone down. Like, they're facts. So whether you copy and paste it or whether you type it from scratch, the factual parts are going to be the same. And of course, in an executive summary, there shouldn't be anything in there which isn't in the main body of the report. So of course, they're going to be very similar, almost identical. So the executive summary needs more in it than the conclusion. So I think of it as kind of like conclusions plus. So I do cover this in the video that on the video course, and you can watch the first requirement for free. But as I've said, I would copy the conclusions over as a starting point, so you've got the main numbers in there. because the numbers are the numbers. You know, revenue's gone up by this, whether you write it from scratch or you copy and paste it, it's going to be the same. So I'd copy the conclusions over as a starting point. So you've got the main numbers on there for each section. So you've got the main number for revenue, cost of sales, gross profit, and the KPI issue. But then I would go back to the main body of the report and I would think, what else is in here that was really important? And this is where the skill comes in. Because if you look at the marking key, if you look at the conclusions, you can see revenue, cost of sales, gross profit, KPI issue. And then if you look at the exec summary, revenue, cost of sales, gross profit, KPI issue, of course they're there because, you know, that's what you've been asked to report on. And therefore they need those numbers with a comment need to be in the conclusions and in the exec summary. But you can see this point here down below, this box here down below, there's some additional points. And this is where the skill comes in because you need to then think back to what else was important. And you're probably thinking about more of these further insight points. Which of these are important that I now want to add back into the exec summary? So they weren't in the conclusions, but I'm bringing them into the exec summary. So think of like the exec summary as like conclusions plus, if you like. Whereas in the conclusions, you just need the headline numbers, what it's gone up by. But in the exec summary, you're deciding what are the most important points that you want to bring to the attention of the directors, the executives, the people who are reading the report. Of course, you can't bring in too much because there is this mark for appropriate summary of report. So again, there's a bit of a balancing act. You've got your conclusions in there to get these points. You know you need to add in a few more points or have a few specific recommendations, but you can't have too many or you lose this one. Because remember, 4 to get a clearly competent, 3 to get an SC, and there's only 4 points in each of these boxes, which makes these boxes inherently harder. So actually, you don't want to miss out on that because that's quite an easy one to get. It's just by not having kind of too much in there. So therefore, there's a balancing act to have. And if you look at the publication, which is available on the ICAEW website, they kind of clarify this point that copy and pasting as a first step, you know, is fine to do, but then they want to see students showing the skill of what additional points should be in the exec summary. So you could copy your conclusion so you've got the main numbers in there as a starting point because you're just using basic technology, you know, as you would in a real report. If you had to have a summary and a conclusion, you probably would just copy over the main numbers. But then you need to be selective and decide what points are most important to bring to the attention of the directors. Then usually we're thinking here, and this is from our pro forma report, but is there a particular channel which is going up or going down? Is there a significant change in profit margins? The sorts of things that directors would be concerned about. Directors probably aren't concerned if, you know, labor costs have gone up by 1% due to an inflationary pay rise, when labor's a small part of cost of sales. But they're interested in their headline numbers of big things affecting the business that actually, without Taylor's, revenue had gone down. So actually your underlying business is declining. That's a concern to the directors. So hopefully that's addressed the popular question there about the exec summary. But again, that's covered in more detail in that video class, which you can watch. So then the next question, 2 questions. So points mentioned in the marking key, are they obvious points? i.e. if we make a valid point and it wasn't on the marking key, no mark would be given. Yeah, that's correct. If you make a point isn't on the marking key, then no mark would be given. Would you recommend to state or expand the obvious? Is it an easier way to get the mark? Well, no. I mean, if you make the point, you'll get the mark. You know, it has to be in like a full sentence, and you have to say, you know, why it's a benefit or why it's a risk, or, you know, you're critiquing an assumption using that point. I think a lot of the points in the marking key are fairly obvious. Some perhaps are not as obvious. I think, you know, particularly when you're just picking up something from the exam paper, like reasons why revenue have gone up. I think that's pretty obvious from the exam paper. But it is frustrating when you make a perfectly good point and you don't get a mark for it. to be honest with you, it's just tough luck. Like we've all been there. That's just the way it works with case study. It is frustrating. But then if you write in a short, concise way, like I've been demonstrating, then you can get plenty of points down and you'll be able to get more. And then the other question is, all the info from the AI and in the exam relevant, or would there be any red herrings? I don't think there's any, like, I think in the AI, kind of red herrings, I guess, but there might be things which just don't end up coming up in the exam. So yeah, there might be a red herring. Like, for example, there was quite a lot mentioning about DGS getting that new pigging equipment. And therefore that could have been a potential requirement 2 or requirement 3, but it didn't really come up in much detail, even though we were told kind of like how much they could potentially save from it in terms of product. And therefore we had a mock exam question on it. So possibly there. Not in the exam paper though. And certainly the examiners don't try to do anything to like trick you. So yeah, in the AI, there'll be some areas which just aren't relevant at all. But not so much in the exam paper. They certainly don't put anything in there to trick you. I think with the AI, they leave it like intentionally open so it isn't too predictable. So there's quite a few different things coming on and you don't know exactly which one will be developed in the exam. But it's not really to trick you. I guess it's just to make sure that it's not too predictable. The examiners, they're very nice, reasonable people. And at the end of the day, I think everyone really has the same goal. We want to get you through and qualified as chartered accountants. But of course, you need to just be at a certain standard. So they're just ensuring that quality, really. They're not, trying to, trick you and, make people fail. I know it can be quite difficult, with all the exams I've done. You don't really know the examiners, what they look like, but of course, or, who they are. But, they're all just very normal, reasonable people. So yeah, I don't think there's anything nasty in the exam that's going to try and catch you up purposely. So the next question: when would you stop looking at past papers and just focus on the AI and mocks? Yeah, I know the AI comes out next week, but to be honest with you, there isn't really that much you can do with it on the first week. So I would probably say the next couple of weeks, you could still do past papers and then switch on to your AI. There's a huge amount to be learned from doing past papers, just because you can get more practice. You can also see real ICAEW exams as well. These mock exams are great. We make them kind of really accurate. If you look at this mock exam and compare it to actually what came up, you'll see, it's a really good reflection and a really similar standard to what you had to produce in the exam. But nonetheless, the ICAEW exams are written by the ICAEW and of course, by the specific examiner that will be examining you, not us who have designed this exam. So it is really good to see that what a real exam looked like and a marking key and everything like that. And of course, you can read one set of AI and practice several exams out of it. So it really is useful to do to practice past papers. And of course, the exam's in the same format every time as well. So, it's not going to be any different for your exam. So even though it's a different business, it's fundamentally exactly the same. So I would, suggest, particularly if you already read an AI, this is why we've put, our mock exams up. So you can get a few exams out of each AI, because I know it takes a long time to read the AI. And, if it wasn't for us putting our mock exams out, you'd only be able to do one exam on it, the real exam. But, now you can get a few out of it. So it makes it much more worthwhile. So next question: how many mock exams should you do before you're absolutely sure you'll pass, maybe even be in the top quartile? Would you say if I do both of those AIs and all the mocks you have on your website and then 3 more mocks with you, do you think that's enough work? Absolutely. You're talking about 9 mock exams. Absolutely. It's about the quality of your the work and the effort you put in as well. So, make sure watch your videos, understand the technique. But yeah, if you go away and practice, 3 times. So even if you did the first one and you just did all the requirement ones. So you've got mock exam 1, mock exam 2, mock exam 3, all lined up, and you did like a requirement 1 like each night for 3 days. So you did the requirement, you looked at the marking key, you appreciated what all the points were, you looked at the model answer, you can see how you should have structured each point. You look at your answer and mark it, and you see which points you got, which points you didn't get, and then you look at the model answer to see how you should have got those points. And that will really familiarize you with the marking key and the technique. So yeah, you don't even have to do them all as full 4-hour mock exams, but you could do the first 3 like that. Then you could do the other 3 for the July exam. You could do those as full papers if you've got the time. And then if you do mock exams on your actual case study business as well, yeah, that'll be more than enough. You'd be doing extremely well if you did all of that. Even if you just did 3 off the mock exam, and of course the ICAEW exam as well, so you get 4 exams out of it actually. And then did the 3 on your actual business. That would be really good. The advantage of doing the past papers is you can build up your understanding of the marking key and what to do for each section before you get onto your case study business. So when you get onto your case study business, you're not wasting time thinking about, what needs to go under this section, and what type of points do I have here. So you already would have perfected your technique before your case study business has come out. And also, in addition to that, when you read through your AI, you'll be able to read it in a more exam-focused way because you'll know what the requirements are, and you know what types of points come up in each question. So next question, if you really struggle with calculation time-wise, how do you ensure you get them broadly right with spending too long on them? Are there a few types of calculations we could refer to as pro formas? Yeah, so I think, when the AI comes out, we will do obviously mock exams, and therefore you would have had some practice on the types of calculations. But yeah, it does come with practice. And to be honest, requirement 1, the analysis of the management account, yes, it is different business to business, but you can start practicing that now, because if you start working on those past papers, then you can improve your speed, because it's just number crunching really. It's typing in the prior year numbers, putting in the current year numbers, and you get quicker using the ICAEW software. With requirement 2s and 3s, obviously they'll be a bit more specific to the business, but the nature of the questions is quite similar from mock exam to mock exam. So I really just do think with practice, you will get quicker. So the question is, I've purchased your video course and will be getting your materials. When the AI is released next week, what would you focus on doing until you release your materials to start getting as familiar as possible with the AI? So I think, just have a read through it. Like I said, there's still some time for you to practice on past exam papers to get your technique right. I think if you've done that and you mastered your technique, if you're using a video course, you've seen me work through each requirement, I'm sure you've practiced some yourself as well. So assuming that you have done that and you're comfortable with your exam technique and you already know what goes under each section and you've practiced quite a lot, then you have a read through the AI, and just as you read through it, just think, where's this likely to be in the exam? And of course, having done the past papers, you'll know, in that set of AI, these points are usually context points, or this is going to be for requirement 1. But then, yes, of course, we'll release our materials, and then you can see my analysis and you can start working through the mock exams. So next question is it possible to purchase the material in isolation without the video course? Yes, absolutely. So if you go down to the mock exams, AI analysis and pro forma report, you can just get those. You can just get the report, the pro forma report, the AI analysis and the mock exams, and the release dates are here for those. The next question is, let me rephrase that. How much work did you do before your exams? How many mock exams did you do, if you remember? So I actually did all the past papers. Now, I did it a long time ago now, but in July 2014. The exam hasn't actually changed that much since then. So I did the 4 actual exams before then. Now, there was only 4 past papers available because it changed in 2012. So I did those 4, and then I did some mock exams on the case study business. So what I didn't have available was as many past papers as you do. So I would have done less than what you suggested before, because I think you suggested doing the 3 mock exams at each sitting and the actual exam. So that's A plus another 3. So yeah, you would have done more than me if you do that. Yeah. So next question is, would you recommend putting all the numbers, figures for all the requirements at the end in the appendix, or the relevant figures after each relevant requirement? So the examiners are happy for you to have like the appendix just before the requirement, and that's where I like to have it, so I can, because you do the results section first, so then I can just quickly kind of scroll up and get it. It's a lot of scrolling back and forth if you have them at the end. Just make sure it's got like a proper title. That's quite important. Not just Appendix 3, like, you know, website opportunity, or perhaps that isn't a good example actually, but here, you know, new product proposal, or analysis of management accounts for this year. So the question is, how many past papers would you suggest to do prior to switching over to the AI? It does depend on, have you got CR and SBM as well? If so, your time is obviously more restricted. What other commitments have you got? I'd say at least 1, because, and the next question is, of course, or the next comment is just saying that it takes a long time to read the AI. Absolutely, like, it takes a long time to read it. That's the problem. It takes a long time to read the AI, but, you know, we've done as much as we can to help, because you've got the AI analysis here. We've got it all summarized in note form, ready to use, and it'll help you familiarize you with it. And then you've got 3 mock exams plus the actual exam. Now, when I did it, you know, and when other students have done it, you know, in the past, you might have to read a whole set of AI and just get 1 exam out of it. At least now you're getting a few exams out of it. There's no other way around it. I mean, it is really valuable practice to do it. It doesn't take too long to go through the AI. Maybe, like, you know, a couple of evenings, 2 or 3 evenings. You don't have to go over the top on it. And kind of like I said as well, remember, most of the points come from the exam paper. So even if you are a little bit underprepared on the AI, you know, you should be able to good attempt at the exam. The question is, you mentioned reading 1 set of AI, doing the mock exams to get multiple attempts. Given that you mentioned spending 2 more weeks on past papers, should we focus on doing the mocks with multiple versions, or just try to cover more ICAEW mocks with different AIs? No, I think with each set of AI, so if you read a set of AI, then do as many exams on it as you can. That's the important thing, to get as much exam practice. So read November 22, 2021 AI. Then attempt the 3 mock exams with the model answers and the marking key, then do the ICAEW actual exams. And then if you've got time, do July as well, or vice versa. If you're already familiar with one of them, do the one you're familiar with. But yeah, focus on getting more exam attempts. Next question is, would you say the pro forma you've created is pretty much the same structure as previous years? Yeah, it's broadly the same, because of course the marking key is the same, the requirements are the same. So, you know, you'll see that. And that's why past papers are useful, because the exam's in the same format. Yes, it's on a different business. It's almost like, I mean, it's not quite the same, but, you know, if you think about FAR question 1, turn single entity financial statement, turn a TB into a set of single entity financial statements. It's on a different business every time, but the fundamental requirement is the same. And it's just the same thing here. It's just, obviously there's a lot more information on the business, but the requirements are the same. What you have to do is the same. So, of course, practicing past papers is a useful thing to do. You know, of course, mock exams on your own business are, you know, even better, really, in a way, but, you know, we'll come to that. The thing you can do now, of course, is, you know, practice on this. And it's all about exam technique at the end of the day, as it is with all the ACA exams. So the question is, how would I balance this while doing CR and SBM? So it's quite a very common question that we get asked. So I've done a video here. There's one on CR, there's one on SBM, just on how to prepare yourself for those exams and how to set up a study plan. It is difficult doing all three. Kind of depends where you're at with CR and SBM. A huge amount of professional level content for those. Hopefully you're back up to speed with. I mean, it does vary very much by individual, but as a very broad rule of thumb, maybe 40% CR, 30 SBM, 30 case. But yeah, it is difficult to balance those three, and it does depend on where you're at, and it is depends on what your strengths and weaknesses lie. But there are quite a lot of overlaps between CR and SBM, and actually even case to some extent, because there's that requirement one in case study is also, as I said, similar to financial statement analysis in corporate reporting, similar to analysis of business performance in SBM. They're very similar. So there is some overlaps there. There's other overlaps, of course, between CR and SBM as well, like financial reporting treatment of leases, assets, hedging, etc. groups. So hopefully that's addressed a few questions there about those three. I mean, I always suggest starting as early as possible. We are where we are now. So yeah, you obviously definitely need to be going like full steam ahead from now on. That's a good question. Should we concentrate on July mocks rather than November because there are different examiners? Well, if you look at the exams, there isn't much difference between them. They obviously, it has to be an element of consistency, between them, and the marking keys, the same every time. It is true that there are different examiners for each. I don't think it makes a material difference, but yeah, maybe do the July exam if you prefer, if you want to use the exams that examiner used. But to be honest with you, if you switched them around last year, I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. To be honest with you, I don't think it makes a material difference. I know there's a lot kind of said about it, but I think there's just so much consistency. I think, honestly, like I said, if you switch them around this year, I don't think I'd be able to tell the difference. If you switch them around last year, I don't think I would be able to tell the difference. But yeah, it is a good observation to make. So I hope everyone has found that useful and has given you a bit of kind of direction on to what you should be doing in the build up to the release of the AI, and then when it comes out, final closing things really, I would just say is it is absolutely all about exam technique. So just practice and practice and practice your exam technique, get really familiar with this marking key so that you need to know what you need to do for each section, use the exam paper to answer the specific requirements, and then just practice that exam technique that me and my students have been using with great success. And I know many of you, some of you are on the live course, others are using the video course, and others will be just using the materials. But yeah, very much looking forward to getting you through your case study exam. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining this evening, and yeah, wish you all the best and look forward to helping you get through your final exam.